Through the time that NASCAR has just been around, there's been plenty of different rules and different customs that have fallen by the wayside. Well, today I want to look at a couple of these because I think that it's really cool to see some of the stuff NASCAR did, even if it could be relatively dumb to today's standards. Also, I want to look at some of these that people think are going to come back when in reality, it's not really a possibility. As much as some of them coming back would be cool, it's probably not going to happen. So let's get to it. The first thing that NASCAR used to do that I don't think it will ever do again is to basically race back to the line, kind of 2003 on back style. For the longest time, when a caution would come out, drivers would race back to the start-finish line to have their position or get back in the lead lap. Well, as NASCAR drivers always do, they kept pushing the limit. And safety concerns started to be a realistic possibility, and there were a few near misses that, in a post-Dale Earnhardt death world, was not in the comfort zone of NASCAR at the time. When this rule was changed in 2003, it had only been 2 years since the death of Earnhardt. So you can understand why NASCAR would be a bit gun-shy on putting its drivers in danger when it didn't have to. So it was a casualty of the crusade against basically drivers' deaths. It's not a bad thing. As much as I would like it to happen, and in certain instances I think it could happen, NASCAR sticking with the black and white rule of your position is your position at the caution is probably for the best. Though it does make finishes at the end anticlimactic when there's a caution. The second thing that NASCAR used to do that I never will see it doing again in my opinion is having a bye week after the second Cup race of the season. This is something that NASCAR actually did. And with an Easter break earlier in the season as well, I really think that this is a dumb move, but NASCAR at the time was so popular that it could overcome losing momentum after the first two races. I remember being a kid and having watched the Daytona 500, having watched a race usually at California, and then wondering where the race was. I never got why, as your season is heating up, as it's the biggest sporting, basically, series in America at the time, why you give up that week. Long term, I think that it really doesn't have that big of an effect over time, but I do not see NASCAR ever doing this again unless there's a specific reason or that weekend lies on Easter weekend. It's the only way I see that happening. But NASCAR doing that again, probably not. The next thing that I never see NASCAR doing again is selling over 200,000 tickets for a race. Now, this one is kind of a low blow, I think, so I'm not going to go too much in on it, but NASCAR back in the early 2000s and the 90s was just amazing when it came to the amount of people attending a race. And while it still is today, I mean, look at the 2020 Daytona 500. Easily had 120 to 130,000 people there. But the days of having 200,000 fans come into NASCAR races, I think are over, and I don't think are ever going to happen again. You look at Indianapolis, for instance. That's the only place I think you realistically could have that anymore. And that race is pretty much dead to a lot of fans. I mean, they could have 70,000 people there and you would never know. But they're never going to fill that place up 4/5 to 3/4, give or take, of what it could be. So I don't think this will ever happen again. Now, the next thing that NASCAR will never do again that I think all of us can breathe a heavy sigh of relief over is that they are never going to stack the schedule with mile-and-a-half races again. Over time in the late 90s and early 2000s, mile-and-a-half tracks were perfect when it came to hosting both NASCAR races and IndyCar races. Well, over time, that desire went down, and the racing at these tracks suffered. While tracks like Chicagoland and Kansas came into their own, there were tracks like Kentucky that just never produced good racing. It just wasn't going to happen, and that happened at a lot of mile-and-a-halves. Now, do I think mile-and-a-half should be taken off the schedule completely? No. Homestead is a great mile-and-a-half no matter the package I run on it. Kansas has the ability to make all-time great races and finishes as well. Just look at the, I believe, 2019 Kansas spring race. Also, Chicagoland, if it ever came back, had great finishes, and if you look back in its history, had a lot of good races compared to what most mile-and-a-halves had. and Atlanta, when having the right surface, is one of the best tracks on the schedule. So I don't think mile and a half should be taken off completely, but let's be honest, having so many instead of short tracks and road courses just doesn't sit right. Now the next one up, you're gonna think that I'm making up, but I'm not. And NASCAR will never do this again because of the horrible safety value that it has. And when I say safety value, I mean no safety whatsoever. NASCAR will never dry the track by helicopter again, at least not as something that they more regularly do. If it's a desperate move, maybe at like a big track like Talladega where you can be away from the fans at different points. But it's just too dangerous for the pilots, for people at the track, for the drivers even, depending on where the helicopter is at. But NASCAR used to do this in the old days. And there was a time where a helicopter actually landed in the stand because it was too low. So I don't see NASCAR ever doing this again, especially in the days of the Air Titans and jet dryers. But to say that that is some wild-ass shit is an understatement. Now, the next thing that NASCAR is not going to do ever again is put lapped cars on the bottom line with the leaders on restarts. This is something that NASCAR did for a long time. They would have lapped cars pull up on the bottom line next to the leaders, and the leaders would have to race those lapped cars who were trying to get their laps back. Well, as you can probably tell, this had a lot of problems to it. While I don't think that this is a bad rule whatsoever, and I personally don't mind if this came back, I understand how people could get annoyed if somebody that's 2 or 3 laps down with 11 to go lines up on the bottom line and ruins one of your favorite drivers' races. So I understand why this is gone. Now, another thing that NASCAR isn't going to allow that I'm kind of torn on is they're not going to allow NASCAR race cars to hit the speeds that they were hitting in the 80s at Daytona and Talladega. At least they'll never let them consistently hold that again. When we had the 2-car tandems, we did hit high speeds that were very close to that. But NASCAR since then has tried to slow the cars down. And with what happened to Ryan Newman in 2020, NASCAR continues to try and keep the cars slower at Daytona and Talladega. We had amazing speeds at Michigan after the repave in 2012, but that is something that's short term. It didn't last past, I think, 2014, especially as we took the horsepower down. NASCAR is never going to allow this to happen again, and if by some reason they do allow this to happen, they're going to find a way to get rid of it quickly. High speeds equal more danger, and that's something that NASCAR just doesn't want. Me personally, I really think that they should allow the teams to just run wild. Take a bunch of the rules and regulations away and see who has the faster cars. Let the competition drive the speeds up. If NASCAR needs to intervene, they need to intervene. But the fact that they're purposely trying to keep the cars slower just doesn't draw most racing fans to the sport better. The next thing that NASCAR is never going to allow to happen again is for them to run the overtime line. That was one of the most embarrassing things that NASCAR has tried. There was really nothing wrong with the restart policy, but at Talladega, because of dangers at Talladega and Daytona earlier in the year, they went to 1 restart at the end of the race. Then, Kevin Harvick, allegedly, I say in high quotation marks because we know he did it, intentionally crashed somebody at Talladega, causing a bad finish where Joey Logano won over Dale Earnhardt Jr., who was in the playoffs, and it was just a horrible hubbubaloo. But NASCAR, in a knee-jerk reaction to a problem that they caused, changed the restart policy so that if the cars got in the first lap to this certain point, this arbitrary point on the backstretch, the race would be official. Now, another thing that NASCAR is not going to do past 2021, and it will never do this again, especially where society is going with it, NASCAR is never going to have a fully gas-powered car, at least in Cup, ever again. NASCAR is going to a more hybrid-based system, the way that most of the racing world is. And while at first one might not be for this, it is going to add horsepower to the car. As long as it doesn't add push to pass, I'm fine with it. It's more environmentally friendly, so it's something that a lot of the younger people will be fine with. And from what it sounds like, it's not really going to make the car sound that bad, at least in my opinion. I know people complained about it, but let's be real, on social media, everybody complains. But aside from the nostalgia factor, can you really come up with an argument that is bad about going hybrid? Now, the last thing that NASCAR used to do that it's never going to do again is a full season points champion. Listen, I know there's plenty of talk around the points format. I know I've been against the current points format, and I have called for a full season points format back. But I'm going to be realistic. It's not going to happen. I want it to happen. I think it is the way to crown a champion with the most integrity. I think it tells you who was the best over a 36 race span, but they're not going to do it. NASCAR and the people at the top of NASCAR have stated that they're going for an entertainment-based product. And unfortunately, a 36 race championship format does not produce the same entertainment value that NASCAR wants that a chase or a playoffs would. Plus, NASCAR officials have also said that they are sticking by the playoffs long term. NASCAR is not going to go back to a full season points format unless the schedule is drastically shortened. Personally, I want them to, but realistically, I know we're not. And that's it. Those are things that I think NASCAR will never do again that they used to do. Let me know down in the comments below, though. Am I wrong? Or what ones did I miss? Again, let me know down there in the comments. And while you're at it, leave a like on this video, share this video, and subscribe to my channel for more great NASCAR content like this. Have a happy Easter for those of you celebrating. And until next time, have a good one.